we need to stop thinking about left politics in terms of allyship, but instead recognize the absolute imperative of comradeship. We need comrades. We need people who recognize ourselves as being on the same side of a political struggle. There's a language on the contemporary left about allyship that encourages people to think about themselves as allies, helping others or assisting or standing with others in their struggles. And this language of allyship is coercive, and it's also misleading, and we need to get rid of it. So how is it coercive? It's coercive in that it's like the someone who is supposed to be the ally is somehow understood as separate from a political struggle to which they are allying or which they're allies of, as if this separate struggle is somehow the possession of another group or another person. So, an example is men being allies with women in the women's struggle, or white people being allies with Black people in the struggle for Black liberation. And so there's a very strange kind of separation of struggles, as if it were not in the interest of men and women to favor women's equality, as if it were not in the interest of white and Black people to support Black liberation. So there's the language of allyship makes us start from the beginning from a position of political separateness and a position of political ownership. Like, some people have ownership over a struggle, and then they can be gatekeepers onto whether or not others are allowed into it. This gatekeeping function is actually the kind of quintessential move around allyship. It's like, oh, are you the potential ally? Are you dedicated enough? Are you good enough? Are you sacrificial enough to be part of my or our struggle? So it's like the ally is put from the beginning on their back foot. This is actually a really terrible way to approach organizing. So someone wants to come in to a group or a political space and join the fight. And it's like, well, I don't know. Are you good enough? Are you one of us? Like, have you done your homework? I think you're really sketchy. So there's this gatekeeping aspect to allyship that's politically detrimental, right? It hurts us. It prevents us from building the kinds of solidarity collectives that we need. So it's also like, then this gatekeeping makes the whole discourse of allyship kind of like a sort of a version of neoliberal self-help and a kind of like carceral culture, in that it's like, I'm going to police you. I'm going to police your speech. Have you said the exact right thing? I'm going to police your sources. Have you read the right things? Are you evoking the correct resources when you speak to us? So there's something super policing and super judgmental about this kind of gatekeeping function of allyship. There's also something in this gatekeeping function that's almost like a private property. It's like, we or I have a property in this struggle, and anybody else who comes into it, it's like they have to not just get my permission, but sort of recognize my priority here, recognize that it is really and truly mine. And the weird thing about that is that there's an assumption then of a seamlessness between identity and the politics around it, as if like any woman has claim to a women's struggle, even like, someone like Margaret Thatcher or some kind of, horrible sexist right-wing woman somehow is the gatekeeper for anything around women's struggles. Like, that can't be true. Or if I think in the United States example, and we have a Supreme Court member, Clarence Thomas, who's a Black man, and he's like crazy right wing. And so just think that he would be an arbiter over what counts as, effective struggle for Black liberation, that makes no sense. So there's this seamlessness of identity in politics that underpins the discourse on allyship that's really politically detrimental. It doesn't help left politics. It assumes an identity. It assumes the connection between identity and struggle. It assumes that struggles are something that some groups can own, and it assumes that they begin from positions of separateness, right? That the struggles start out separate rather than being all parts of a common struggle for an emancipatory, egalitarian future. So I think that we need to stop thinking about left politics in terms of allyship, but instead recognize the absolute imperative of comradeship. We need comrades. We need people who recognize ourselves as being on the same side of a political struggle. As comrades, we are all committed to a struggle against colonialism, against imperialism, against racism, against white supremacy, against capitalism, against sexism, against homophobia. It's not the case that some groups own one part of the struggle. It might be the case that some people can speak to it and give insight that others don't have. That's important to recognize. But the language of allyship is not about that. The language of allyship is about policing and separating and claiming ownership. And we have to get rid of that on the left and instead recognize the imperative of building comradely relations between those on the same side of a political struggle. It's not an accident that the language of allyship and the injunction to be a better ally is so common in social media. We're all used to seeing these, right? These things like guides to being a better ally, or real allies make sure that they listen, that they wait till someone else speaks, that they always step back. We're told that real allies, don't ask people to explain their experience, or don't ask people to, tell them about their oppression. Like real allies are told, go find out for yourself. Go do your homework. You go look it up and then come back. I mean, that's like just telling someone to Google it, right? And Google it is not a way to build political education. Telling someone to Google it is just like saying, go be a consumer. Anything that you'll find is as good as any other thing. But when we're in political struggle, what we have to do is connect with one another around shared analyses, around shared understandings, around common approaches to an analysis of how do these forms of oppression intersect and overlap with one another? How do they build off one another? Why is it the case that it's impossible to have real Black liberation under capitalism? Why is that the case? Like, we need to be able to explain that. And that means talking to people not in terms of this kind of allyship, self-help, go find out for yourself, but instead building a common language around a shared tradition and a shared community of struggle. Allyship is like so perfect for social media because it lets people kind of enjoy telling others off. It lets them enjoy performing a kind of superiority or expertise. It lets them enjoy performing politics without actually having to do the hard work of organizing, of going door to door, of working with comrades to come up with a plan, to plan a demo, to actually get involved. This whole language of allyship makes politics something that the individual does inside themselves or on social media. It's like where the political struggle is supposed to be is in yourself. Do you have the right attitude? Have you really thought about your language, right? It's like, look inside yourself first rather than engage in political practice with others. But that's a recipe, honestly, that's a recipe for right-wing empowerment, because it makes the left so utterly divided because people are only thinking about themselves. So allyship works for social media, right? Because it it energizes stuff like cancel culture. It energizes the outrage of the everyday while preventing people from building the kinds of trust and connections that we need for organized political revolutionary socialist struggle. One of the themes that I take up in Camarada concerns this strange antinomy or division that we encounter in contemporary left, left fora, whether or not it's activist fora or online, or art circles or university circles or what have you. And that's this division between survivors and systems. So on the one hand, it seems like we encounter in contemporary politics a lot of emphasis on the struggle to survive, on saying like, I can't do anything until I meet my own survival needs, or, at this point, just surviving is its own victory, surviving day to day, like that's the goal. If I've survived, then I've won. So you can see how the language of survival ends up being kind of individualist, if I've survived. But it's more than that. I mean, it's clear that the intensification of capitalist inequality and exploitation and competition under, what goes under as neoliberalism or precarity capitalism, it really has made the struggle to survive much harder than it was for the generations who were able to benefit from the working class victories to achieve some parts of the social welfare state. So the issues around everyday survival are real. But the problem is to think that that's what politics is, or that's enough for politics, or that politics is itself just a matter of survival. I mean, politics is about struggling for the conditions to make our survival better, to make so that we survive not at the expense of others. It's actually to make sure that we can have a system of flourishing and freedom and emancipation. Like survival is such a it's such a small goal. I mean, yes, it's important, but we got to fight for justice, right? We have to fight for more than that. During one of the things that we talked about last summer, the summer of 2020, was the anti-police protests cured COVID. Now that's a sort of slang or abbreviation for thinking about how, in the midst of the pandemic, there was the largest set of demonstrations that have ever happened in the United States. Over 35 million people were out in the streets protesting the police murders of George Floyd and so many others. And the fear of the virus went away. Right. It was like clearly just surviving, right, in your own little house, with your own little, unit trying to fear infection. That wasn't enough. The struggle for justice was more important. So, but one of the things that we're told, or that we find ourselves confined in these days, is a sense that, oh no, survival is itself. That's the politics. Well, it's not. Survival is not the politics. And the other side of this preoccupation with survival is actually a preoccupation with systems, which is like the system of capitalism, the system of algorithms, the system of the internet, the larger systemic features that go on around us, like somewhat, the Anthropocene, right? Climate change. Some people would even say, bring in things like, galaxies and geology and all the massive interplanetary gravitational systems. And the thing about the system language is that it also has this effect of erasing the political element, right? Which is actually, it's our organized struggle that can change and impact the systems. It's the systems are not independent of our organized political struggle. They react to them, they shape them, their environments for them, they themselves are changed and conditioned by them. I mean, maybe not the galactic system, but clearly the capitalist system, the economic system, climate change, so-called Anthropocene. All of these kinds of systems are also impacted and influenced by politics. When we let the language of systems on the one side, or the language of survivors, dominate our thinking, we erase or occlude or block from our frame of reference, the fact of political struggle. And that's what I'm trying to open up in Camarada, is the fact that our engagement with each other as comrades on the same side of a political struggle is crucial for going forward. And we don't have the space for doing that if our analyses are limited to systems or survivors. In Camarada, I identify 4 key attributes of comrades. These attributes are discipline, joy, enthusiasm, and courage. And I think most of us get behind joy really easily, and enthusiasm and courage are pretty self-evident. But for many contemporary people, discipline kind of raises the hair on the back of your neck. And it seems like, wait a minute. I thought that discipline was something we're trying to resist, or we're trying to break away from. And I think that I fully disagree, right? In fact, discipline's absolutely crucial if we're going to be the kind of committed political force that we need to be for the struggles that we face. So let's think a little bit more about discipline. So first of all, discipline enables us to do more than we think that we can do. How does it do that? It enables us to do that by making us accountable. Like when we have comrades around us, our comrades, being accountable to them and being disciplined through that accountability makes us do things that we might not want to do. And we do it because we don't want to let them down. So for example, a disciplined comrade, goes to the actions even though it's raining. The disciplined comrade goes to the meetings even though they're tired. The disciplined comrade, steps up to hand out the papers, make the banners, write the press releases, do the work. I mean, the discipline actually is what gives us the capacity to do more than we thought we could. So there's a really tight connection between the discipline that our relations with our comrades instills in us, like making us do things that we might not otherwise do. That's necessary for the success of us as an organized left. But there's actually even more to it than the kind of this level of being able to get the job done because you don't want to let your comrades down. There's more to discipline than that. And that's, in some ways, discipline actually liberates and frees us. When we subject ourselves to comradely discipline, we recognize like, oh, I don't have to have a hot take on every single thing that comes through my Twitter feed, right? I don't have to be, sort of super creative and original. I know what my party thinks, what my group thinks, and I can either be quiet just because it's not necessary for me to say everything. I can exercise that kind of discipline, or I can exercise the discipline of forwarding the party line. But having a little bit here of having self-discipline here and not feeling this compulsion to comment on everything, to constantly present ourselves as creative and original, but instead to be disciplined enough to be part of the group, right? To accept the framework of the group, the guidance of the group. This liberates us from this constant command to perform creativity and perform originality. So I think that the discipline on the left has gotten a bad rap. We look at it only as a kind of external control when it needs to be understood as the internal control we develop through collective practice with our comrades. Right? We develop it in ourselves because we start to recognize that it's absolutely it's absolutely imperative. It's what makes us into a political instrument that can achieve victories. There's one more, maybe more everyday aspect of discipline that we should recognize, which is, in fact, even though on the left we often act as if like discipline is some kind of thing that the boss puts on the worker. A lot of us also admire the discipline that people exert when they are able to exercise every day, or when they are able to make themselves paint or practice a musical instrument, or when they're really good gardeners and actually have fresh vegetables. We recognize a kind of discipline that people cultivate. and we even in those instances, we don't just sort of chalk it up to capitalism and the boss. We recognize that there's something in the flourishing of people that discipline enables. So I think we have to rehabilitate discipline on the left and recognize that if we are going to be a political force capable of moving forward in towards an emancipatory, egalitarian future, we have to be disciplined. Much of the left joins liberals in being critical of communist and revolutionary socialist parties, particularly being critical of parties that may take a democratic centralist form. We see these kinds of criticisms from anarchist and horizontalists frequently. And the criticisms tend to rely on this vision of the party as authoritarian leader and cadres who are just kind of mindless functionaries carrying out the orders of one hardcore leader, right? And we get this kind of, it's like a real parody of how a democratic socialist organization functions. Thinking in terms of the comrade and relationships of comradeship within the party helps get us beyond that kind of cartoon caricature of communist parties. How is that the case? Comradeship is the relation between those on the same side of the struggle. It's a resolutely equalizing relationship. As comrades, we all have the same relation to the struggle. We are all instrumentalizing ourselves, equally instrumentalizing ourselves for the sake of the political struggle that we have all voluntarily joined into. Now, once we have that recognition that we're all comrades on the same side of the struggle, then we can start to see like, okay, within any given set of circumstances, whether or not the circumstances are a particular set of actions or a particular campaign or a particular set of struggles, within any given set of actions, we're going to need to divide up the tasks. And for sometimes the task will be those of writing materials. Sometimes the task might be speaking. Sometimes the task might be security related. Sometimes the task might be, reaching out to other organizations and groups. As comrades, we recognize that all of those tasks are imperative, vital, and that they're equal. It's also going to be the case that not everyone is super well suited to doing every one of the tasks. And so we might need to recognize that some people have these skills, but that doesn't make them sort of higher up than others. It doesn't make them, like we are all already comrades, already equal. Additionally, the kind of stereotype parody of the party is that the party makes us do something we don't want, rather than the perspective of our comrades enables us to do things that we want to do, right? We want to be out there in the streets, even though we actually really want to go home and watch television or something. But doing it for our comrades gives us the discipline, gives us the strength, and makes us want what we want to do. So it's not that a leader is coming in and commanding, it's that our relations with our comrades push us to do the things that we signed up to do. I present the comrade as a figure that is generic and universal. When I say generic, it means that it doesn't refer to someone in a way that specifies their race or their gender or their nationality. And sometimes people are skeptical. They're like, well, wait a minute, isn't really comrade just a figure of, white European masculinity? And that's actually like a really terrible suspicion, because it totally erases the heroic contributions of comrades from all over the world for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? I mean, it acts as if there was not a revolution, in China or Vietnam or Korea or Cuba, or the struggles in Africa and other parts of Asia and Southeast Asia for liberation. It acts as if there have not been women comrades fiercely engaged from the very beginning. So I think we have to really resist this idea that a generic term like comrade is somehow secretly not generic, like somehow secretly already partial to a gender or a race, because it's just not that way. It has not been the case that real existing comrades, real existing fighters in struggle have been confined to just one race or just one sex. When we recognize this, we also demonstrate our continued solidarity with our comrades who have passed, right? With their heroism, with their sacrifice. It always strikes me when people say things like, well, isn't it just like communism is a term that people don't like, and maybe we should just rebrand it and not say communist anymore, or not say words like comrade because they sound too communist, and doesn't it have too much of a bad rep, and isn't it sort of off-putting? When people say that, it's like they're betraying the legacy of millions of people, right? They're dishonoring millions of people who fought and died, who gave their lives for an emancipatory, egalitarian struggle for a better world, right? To rid the world of exploitation and oppression, right? It's like if we don't recognize the struggles of communists from all over the world throughout our past as heroic struggles, if we don't honor those, I would just say that we've given up, right? But we need to anchor our struggle in those struggles and recognize, yes, there were mistakes, and there were defeats, and there was also dedication. And part of being a comrade is also to extend comradeship to the comrades that came before us, as well as to generations in the future. So to my Brazilian camaradas, thanks for listening. And I hope you enjoy the book Camarada. In a lot of places in the US, it stimulated reading groups and discussions, and actually become itself a small mechanism to help people reinvigorate their sense of comradeship, and maybe in some places to install a sense of comradeship where there wasn't one before. So I hope you enjoyed the book, and that you are able to talk about it and discuss it with friends and new camaradas.